My husband cheated on me and told me to find someone new. I chose his best friend. Now he's begging me back. I'm 30 years old, living in a small town in the US with my husband, who is 32. We've been married for 5 years. I always believed our marriage was happy. He was thoughtful, funny, and we shared so many wonderful memories. I vividly remember the day we decided to move to the US to build a new life. We held hands excitedly at the airport, dreaming of a bright future in a new land. During those first years far from home, we only had each other to rely on, and that strengthened our bond. Yet, I never imagined things could change so quickly. A few months ago, I started noticing a shift in my husband. He often came home late, sometimes acting distant and uninterested in my daily stories. I told myself it was probably work stress or fatigue. I tried to comfort myself, asking him about his day and taking extra care of him, hoping he would open up if something was wrong. But the distance between us only grew. He stopped his usual affectionate gestures like hugging or kissing my forehead every morning. Our late-night conversations dwindled. Instead, we ate dinner in silence, where my attempts at conversation were met with brief replies and excuses of tiredness before he retreated to bed early. My intuition as a wife told me something was amiss. I started to worry, sensing that his love for me was fading. Then one night, after numerous attempts to draw him closer and ask him directly what was on his mind, he finally spoke. His words shattered my heart. "We need to talk," he began, his voice low, as if he was trying his best to stay calm. My heart pounded in my chest, a vague sense of dread spreading through me. "You've sensed it too for a while, haven't you?" I nodded slightly, tears stinging my eyes. He sighed, avoiding my gaze. "I don't know how to say this," he hesitated. Then after a moment of silence, he blurted out, as if afraid that if he didn't say it now, he never would, I don't think. "I love you anymore." My world crumbled. I stammered in disbelief, searching for a hint of a joke on his face. But no, his eyes were serious and sad. I could only whisper in despair, What are you saying? Are you joking?" He shook his head, his eyes still unable to meet mine. "I'm sorry. I don't want to hurt you, but I can't keep lying to myself and to you. I've tried, but my feelings aren't the same." I didn't know how to react. Everything felt broken. My voice trembled. "Why? What happened? Did I do something wrong? We can work through this, can't we?" He sighed, as if my question caused him even more pain. "No one did anything wrong, it's just, I don't think we're right for each other anymore." I couldn't accept that. How could he say he didn't love me after 5 years together, after all the hardships we had overcome? I kept asking, trying to find a concrete reason. Is it because of work? Because we don't have children yet and you're disappointed? Or are you under pressure? Or is there someone else? He fell silent, a terrifying silence. My heart seemed to stop beating in that moment. I asked again, my voice choked with tears, Is there someone else?" He didn't answer, but the way he couldn't look me in the eyes and his tightly pursed lips were a clearer answer than any words. Like a jolt of electricity, I stood up abruptly, tears streaming down my face. "I can't believe this. After everything." He stood up too, trying to put his hand on my shoulder, but I brushed it off. "Who is she? Tell me, who is she?" I almost screamed, losing control. "You don't know her," he said softly, his face full of remorse, but it only fueled my anger. "Don't know her? How long have you been having an affair? Since when? Is that why you've been distant all this time, right?" I yelled, the questions pouring out, my voice cracking. He lowered his head, his voice trembling. "It's been a few months. But I swear I never intended to hurt you. I didn't want things to turn out like this. I was going to tell you sooner, but... So you chose to be cold so I would have to guess? So I would have to ask? And now you're saying you don't love me anymore, just because you have someone else?" I laughed, a bitter laugh. He looked at me, his eyes also red. She's younger, more beautiful." "I'm sorry. I know I'm a terrible person. But I can't keep living a lie. Every day I come home and see you, I feel more guilty." I was stunned by those words. as if I were a burden, a presence that made him feel guilty. I felt more hurt and humiliated than ever. You said she's younger and more beautiful. He gritted his teeth, nodding slightly. I think you deserve someone better than me. Someone who will truly love you. I'm sorry, I'm truly sorry. Are you advising me to find someone else? I asked through tears, unable to believe my husband was saying these words. He was silent for a few seconds, then said, Maybe that would be good for both of us. Each of his words cut deep into my heart. The man I loved and trusted most in the world was now calmly telling me to find another man because he had found a younger, more beautiful woman. I was in so much pain that I could hardly breathe. But perhaps because I was so hurt, so shocked, I became strangely calm. I wiped my tears and looked directly at him. Fine. If that's what you want. Then I walked past him, up to our room. I slammed the door shut, and that's when I collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. My whole world had collapsed. I couldn't believe that the marriage I had devoted myself to for the past 5 years was now in ashes. The husband I had always loved and respected now confessed that he no longer loved me and had betrayed me. I felt like a complete failure. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with unanswered why questions. Then anger began to consume me. Why did he do this to me? What did I do wrong? Was I not as beautiful as that girl? What about the promises, the vows we made when we got married? Were they just a joke to him? The next day, my husband moved out. Before he left, he tried to talk to me, but I remained silent. I didn't want to hear another word from that man. I didn't want to hear empty apologies or justifications. He had decided to leave, had chosen someone else, so let him go. I vividly remember the moment the door closed behind him, the house becoming eerily silent. I sat down on the floor, lost and empty. It was probably one of the loneliest moments of my life. The following days passed in a blur. I took time off work because I was so distraught. I barely left the house, didn't eat. I just stayed in my room, crying until I had no tears left. Time seemed to stand still, or perhaps I just didn't care anymore. A week later, I received a call from an unexpected person, Brian. Brian is my husband's best friend. We met through him. Brian and my husband had been close since college, and it was Brian who introduced us at a party. Brian also lives in the same town as us. He'd been divorced for 2 years. Since my husband moved out, Brian was the first person to contact me besides a few text messages from colleagues. Honestly, I didn't want to see anyone, but Brian's voice on the phone was sincere. I know what happened. I'm so sorry for what you're going through. If you don't mind, could I come over for a bit? I just want to make sure you're okay. At first I wanted to refuse, feeling tired and not wanting to see anyone. But then I thought, Brian has always been a good friend to both of us. He'd traveled with us, joined us for backyard BBQs every weekend. I always considered Brian like an older brother, a trustworthy friend. Perhaps, in a moment of weakness, I wanted someone to listen and share with, and Brian appeared at just the right time. About 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there stood Brian with 2 hot milk teas, my favorite drink, which my ex-husband must have told him about. Upon seeing me, Brian immediately gave me a tight, warm hug. His concern made me lose it. The tears started flowing again. Brian gently led me inside, placed the milk teas on the table, and sat down next to me on the sofa. I'm sorry, he began, his voice full of regret. I know saying this doesn't solve anything, but I really can't understand why he did that. You're a wonderful wife. I don't want to interfere in your affairs, but I just want you to know that I'm always here if you need anything. I choked back sobs. Brian, what am I going to do? I really don't know what to do anymore. Everything I ever believed in is shattered. Brian listened as I poured out my heart. I told him about my husband's recent changes, about that night when he confessed everything. Brian remained silent, occasionally nodding or taking my hand as if to comfort me. For a moment, I saw Brian's eyes well up. I don't get it. Brian shook his head after hearing my story. I never thought he'd do that. He's so lucky to have you, such a kind and loving wife. If I had a wife like you. He stopped abruptly, as if realizing he had misspoken. I was also a little surprised by that statement. Brian seemed flustered, but then he continued, his voice softening. Sorry, I mean, you deserve to be happy more than anyone. Somehow, Brian's words warmed my heart a little. Perhaps because after the hurt I had just experienced, hearing someone appreciate me like that was really important to me. That day, Brian stayed at my house for nearly 3 hours. We talked about a lot of things, not just the sadness, but also the happy memories the three of us had shared. I laughed through my tears as I remembered the time we went fishing, and I ended up catching the biggest fish, making the two guys envious. Brian talked about his life after his divorce, about how it took him a long time to regain his balance. Sharing with Brian helped me realize that I wasn't alone in this world. Many people experience similar shocks and they still get through it. That night, for the first time in days, I slept soundly. Maybe it was because I had unburdened myself somewhat. In the following days, Brian occasionally stopped by to visit me. He brought food, helped me clean the house, and most importantly, he was there for me when I felt down. Brian's presence was like a life raft keeping me from drowning completely in a sea of sorrow. Gradually, my mood improved slightly. I started going back to work after 2 weeks of leave. Life had to go on, even though my heart wasn't fully healed. My ex-husband, I call him ex-husband for convenience, although legally we are still married because we haven't filed for divorce, seemed to respect my decision. He hadn't contacted me since the day he moved out. I heard from a few friends that he was moving in with his new girlfriend. It was like salt in the wound, but gradually I learned to ignore it. Meanwhile, Brian and I became closer. At first, I saw him only as a friend, a companion helping me through a difficult time. But perhaps because I was in such a vulnerable state, my heart longed for empathy, for love. And Brian, with his gentleness and care, filled the void my ex-husband had left. I noticed the small acts of kindness Brian showed me. He remembered my favorite foods, even looked up recipes online to cook for me. He noticed every time I frowned because of a headache or fatigue, and he would proactively get me medicine or make tea for me. He always listened to everything I said, remembering even the smallest details about me. The feeling of being cared for after a long period of loneliness was truly comforting. One Saturday evening, Brian invited me over to his house to watch a movie. I just got a new projector. Watching movies at home is really fun, he said excitedly. I agreed, thinking it would be better than sitting at home alone with my negative thoughts. Brian cooked dinner, a simple but delicious spaghetti. Then we sat on the sofa and watched a romantic comedy. I don't remember much about the movie because throughout that evening, my mind was elsewhere. While watching the movie, there were scenes where the main characters kissed passionately, and I suddenly realized that it had been a long time since I had experienced such intimacy. Loneliness and the yearning for love surged within me. Beside me, Brian politely kept his distance, but I occasionally saw him glance at me, then quickly look away when our eyes met. During a particularly emotional scene, tears spontaneously welled up in my eyes, probably due to the pent-up emotions within me. Brian gently put his arm around my shoulders, pulling me closer to him. I didn't resist, instead leaning my head on his shoulder, seeking warmth. My heart beat faster. I felt the warmth from Brian's body, heard his heartbeat. A mix of emotions flooded through me, sadness, self-pity, but also a flutter of attraction. Yes, I admit that at that moment I was drawn to Brian. I looked up at Brian. The light from the movie flickered across his face, making his eyes sparkle. He looked down at me. It wasn't clear who initiated it, but a second later, his lips were close to mine. That first kiss was both sweet and bitter. Sweet because I felt the tenderness and sincerity in his kiss. It was like rain watering the barren land in my heart. But also bitter because it reminded me that the person kissing me wasn't my husband, but his best friend. Brian and I pulled away, both breathless. I'm sorry, Brian whispered, as if afraid I would run away. No, I whispered back, don't apologize. The desire to be loved and to forget the pain won. We kissed again, more passionately. Brian carried me into his bedroom. That night, we crossed the line of friendship. I know many people would criticize me for this. That how could I do this to my husband's best friend, that it was wrong. Honestly, at that time, I couldn't think straight. I just knew I was longing for love, longing to touch and be touched by someone. Brian was there, he loved me, he made me feel worthwhile. Waking up the next morning, I was nestled in Brian's arms. I felt happy but also full of guilt. What have we done? I asked myself, tears rolling down my cheeks. Brian woke up, saw me crying, and immediately became worried. Do you regret it? I shook my head, laughing and crying at the same time. I don't know. I just feel like everything is so messed up. Brian hugged me, soothingly. I'm sorry if this makes you sad. I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage of your vulnerability. I truly care about you. A lot. But if you don't feel good about this, we can pretend last night never happened. His sad and sincere voice made my heart ache. I quickly looked up at him. No, it's not your fault. I wanted it too. I guess I was just too lonely. Brian gently wiped away my tears. You're not alone, you have me, he said, then placed a kiss on my forehead. In the days that followed, the relationship between Brian and me changed in a way that neither of us expected. We secretly dated. Yes, it sounds ironic, doesn't it? The wife of a best friend and the husband's best friend secretly involved with each other. But I didn't feel regret, at least not at that time. Because Brian brought me joy, comfort. In his arms, I could temporarily forget the pain of being betrayed by my husband. As for my ex-husband, he was probably happy with his new love. I thought he probably wouldn't care if he knew his wife was now seeing his best friend, since he was the one who told me to find someone else. My relationship with Brian unfolded naturally but was no less passionate. We cooked together, watched movies, walked in the park. Brian made me laugh more than I had in years. He always did silly things to make me laugh, just like my ex-husband used to do when we were madly in love. Brian's sincerity and warmth were like medicine for my soul. However, deep down, I knew there was a constant fear. Fear that this day would eventually end badly. Fear that we were doing something wrong and would have to pay the price. And what I feared most finally happened. Everything came to light one Friday afternoon. I remember clearly that day it rained unexpectedly, the air was chilly. I got off work early, so I decided to surprise Brian by stopping by his office. Brian works for a tech company. His office is not far from my house. Brian usually finishes work at 5 p.m., so I planned to pick him up and we'd go to dinner. I bought 2 hot coffees on the way and stopped by Brian's company. Since I also knew some of Brian's colleagues through barbecues and friend gatherings, my appearance didn't surprise anyone. I sat in the lobby and texted Brian that a special delivery person was waiting for him downstairs with hot coffee. About 5 minutes later, the elevator opened and Brian walked out, his face surprised and then radiant when he saw me. He came over, happily. It's you? What a surprise. I smiled, handing him the coffee, a little surprise for a rainy day. Brian smiled back, about to put his arm around me, then froze when he saw someone behind me. I turned around and froze when I saw my ex-husband. He was standing there, holding a file in his hand, probably having just stepped out of another elevator. I couldn't believe it, my husband was here, in the same office building as Brian. I suddenly remembered that my husband's company, he works in finance, had an office in this building but on a different floor. He must have finished work at the same time, and ironically, the elevator brought him down at this very moment. My husband's eyes darted between me and Brian, then stopped at my hand handing Brian the coffee. At a glance, it could have looked like we were holding hands. I saw his face change, from surprise, confusion, then to anger. What are you doing here? My husband spoke, his voice strained. Clearly seeing his wife and best friend together like this shocked him. I opened my mouth but didn't know what to say. Then Brian spoke, his voice trying to sound natural. Oh, you're here? I and she, For the first time, I saw Brian this flustered. My husband frowned, stepping closer. You too? What the hell are you doing? On a date? I pulled my hand back as if burned. No, it's not what you think, I hurried to say, although the truth was exactly what he was thinking. Not what I think? My husband's voice rose, his eyes flashing with hurt and anger. Then explain, why are you here with Brian? Are you two seeing each other? The tension in the air made a few passers-by turn to look. Brian placed his coffee on the reception desk and said softly, "We shouldn't talk about this here." Calm down. My husband couldn't stay calm. What do you mean, Brian? You and my wife. Oh my God. He seemed to have figured it out. I saw the pain in his eyes, something he hadn't shown in the past few weeks, probably because he was so caught up in his new love that he didn't care about me. Suddenly, he grabbed my arm. "Come home. We need to talk." Brian immediately stepped forward, pulling my husband's hand away from mine. "Hey, calm down. Don't hurt her." My husband turned, almost roaring. "I'll talk to my wife. You have no right to interfere." Brian retorted, his voice sharp. "If you treated her right, she wouldn't be in this situation." "What did you say?" My husband's eyes widened. Seeing the situation about to escalate, I quickly stepped between the two men. "Enough," I yelled, tears streaming down my face. "Enough. If you want to talk, fine, we'll talk at home. Brian, you go ahead." I'm fine." Brian looked at me worriedly. "Are you sure?" I nodded, trying to force a weak smile to reassure him. Brian reluctantly backed away, but still kept a wary eye on my husband. My husband gripped my hand tightly, the first time he had touched me since that fateful night, pulling me out of the building. Outside, it was still drizzling. We were both silent the whole way home. My husband insisted on driving me home, instead of letting me drive myself. The air was thick with tension, my heart racing, my mind a jumble preparing for the next confrontation. Back home, my husband closed the door, and suddenly he burst into tears. This was the first time I had seen him cry since we met. I'm sorry. He kept saying through his tears. I was speechless. What was this? I thought he would yell angrily, blame, or curse me. But no, he was crying like a child. I asked, trembling, What's wrong? My husband sobbed. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Please, don't leave me. I was stunned, almost thinking I was hearing things. This man, who just weeks ago told me to find someone else, was now begging me not to leave him. Seeing my silence, he stepped closer, taking my hand. I know I don't deserve it. I betrayed you, I hurt you. But seeing you with Brian, I went crazy. I can't stand the thought of you being with someone else. My heart ached. What right do you have to not stand it? You were the one who pushed me away. I said, tears falling. I know. I'm a jerk. But please, give me another chance. I regret it so much. She's nothing compared to you. I was foolish and blind. Please. He knelt down before me, weeping pathetically. I had never seen him like this. Please, don't leave me. I can't lose you. I cried too. This was the man I had once loved deeply, sworn to spend my life with. Seeing him in pain, my heart ached too. But then the image of him saying those cruel words that night flashed back. The image of him hand in hand with another woman. The image of me alone in the house, crying my eyes out. Anger flared up again. Do you know what you did? Do you know how you threw away 5 years of our marriage? I yelled through tears, each word choking me. When you were happy with someone else, did you think about my feelings? When you told me to find someone else, did you think that one day you would see me with someone else? My question was like a slap in the face. My husband froze, then he nodded, murmuring, Maybe I'm selfish. But I realize I was wrong. I realize the person I love most is still you. I swear from now on I will never, ever hurt you again. Just come back to me. I stood up, feeling dizzy. How ironic. A plea for forgiveness in the very house he had abandoned. At that time, my heart was truly torn. On one hand, I still loved my husband very much, despite what he had done. He was my first love, the person I had spent so many years with. I couldn't just erase those feelings. Seeing him in pain, my heart ached with him. But on the other hand, I remembered Brian, the person who was there for me when I was down, the person who gave me love and attention when I needed it most. I also had deep feelings for Brian. This situation was so ironic. I was standing between two men, one my husband, the other my new love. One who hurt me and was now repenting and begging, one who had healed my wounds. Finally, after a long silence, I spoke, my voice tired. "It's late, you should go." I need time to think. My husband was about to say something, but then stood up. "Okay, I'll go. But I'll wait for your answer. I won't give up. I'll prove it to you." With that, he slowly left the house, not forgetting to look back at me one last time before the door closed. Once again, the house fell silent, only the sound of the rain pattering outside. I collapsed onto the sofa, my mind in turmoil. What the hell just happened? After that fateful day, my life was turned upside down once again. My husband started trying to contact me frequently. He sent flowers to my house, to my workplace. He wrote long emails apologizing, confessing all his mistakes, recounting how he had broken up with that girl. He even started seeing a therapist, saying that he wanted to become a better person to be worthy of me. He said he would wait for me, however long it took. Brian, of course, knew about that afternoon. That very evening, after my husband left, Brian called me no less than 10 times, but I didn't answer, only texting back briefly, "I'm tired. I want to rest alone." Brian understood and respected that decision. He just texted back, "I understand. I'm sorry for putting you in this difficult situation. Whatever you decide, I respect it and always want you to be happy." Brian's message made me cry. He didn't blame me. He wasn't angry when he knew I had met with my husband. Brian was always like that, always thinking of others, always thinking of me first. In the days that followed, I didn't see Brian or my husband. I told both of them that I needed time to think, and they respected that, although I knew their hearts were burning with anxiety. I thought a lot. During the day, I tried to focus on work to forget the turmoil in my heart. But at night, I couldn't sleep. I made lists of the pros and cons, what I could gain and lose if I chose one of them. If I went back to my husband, he was the person I had loved and been with for 5 years. That feeling couldn't be cut off so easily. If he truly repented, maybe we would have a chance to rebuild, to save our marriage. Maybe, after the storm, the sun would shine again? But could I truly forgive him? Every time I thought about how he had betrayed me, my heart ached. Trust was lost. How could it be regained? I was also afraid that perhaps his remorse was only due to his hurt ego, that he didn't want anyone else to have me, not because he still loved me. And if we got back together, would he get tired of me again one day and leave? And if I chose Brian, he truly made me happy. Brian was gentle, understanding, and I had strong feelings for him. With Brian, I felt valued, listened to, and not afraid of being abandoned or betrayed. Of course, who knows the future, but Brian is a very loyal and sincere person. But being with Brian meant that I had to completely break off my relationship with my husband. I would definitely get a divorce. I would feel guilty because Brian was my husband's best friend. I didn't want to hurt either of them. And what would people, friends, acquaintances think? Certainly, many would criticize me. I also didn't want Brian to have a bad reputation because of this. Every time I received a message from my husband or Brian, my heart ached. I wished I could disappear for a while so everything would settle down on its own. But life isn't that simple. One evening, I decided to meet both of them to talk things through, not at the same time, of course, but separately. I met Brian first at a familiar cafe. Brian arrived, his face sad, but he still managed to smile when he saw me. Seeing him visibly thinner almost made me cry. I knew he had suffered no less than I had in the past few days. We sat down, and I spoke first, my voice choked with emotion. "I'm sorry for putting you in this situation." Brian shook his head. "Don't say that. I got involved in this voluntarily. You're not at fault." I took a deep breath and looked directly at him. "Brian, you've helped me so much. I don't know what I would be like now if it weren't for you. I truly appreciate you, and I care about you deeply." Brian took my hand, his eyes earnest. "I love you too." No, I should say I love you. I know it's selfish to say this now, but it's the truth. I love you. My heart ached upon hearing those words. I I have feelings for you too, I said, but there are so many complicated things between us. Brian nodded slightly, his eyes tinged with sadness. I understand. Your husband, your past, and my friendship with him. I know if we get together, there will be a lot of trouble. I couldn't hold back anymore. Tears started falling again. I'm so tired, Brian. Brian immediately stood up, came to sit next to me, and hugged me. I'm sorry, I should have left you alone. Maybe I shouldn't have let this happen. You've suffered enough, and now I'm making things even more difficult for you. I shook my head in his arms. No, don't blame yourself. It's my fault too. I wanted it too. We sat like that for a long time. Finally, Brian let go of me, looking deep into my eyes. Listen, I don't want you to feel pressured. I accept stepping back to let you decide freely. Whatever you choose, I respect it. If you choose to go back to your husband, I promise to leave, to not bother you too. I just want you to be happy. A tear rolled down his cheek as he said those words. I knew that saying goodbye to me also caused him pain. I hugged him one last time before leaving the cafe. My heart was heavy. I understood that, with those words, Brian implicitly accepted the possibility that I would return to my husband. That evening, I met my husband at the park near our house. I didn't want to invite him home to avoid awkward feelings. My husband looked haggard, stubble, dark circles under his eyes. In just a few weeks, he seemed to have become a different person. We sat down on a bench. I decided to be straightforward. I asked you out here today to talk about our future. My husband swallowed hard, looking nervous. I continued. I've thought a lot about this. I still love you. I can't deny that. 5 years together isn't a short time. I used to think you were my whole life. When you left me, I thought I couldn't live. He was about to say something, but I raised my hand to signal him to let me finish. But I also hate you immensely. My voice started to tremble. You betrayed me, lied to me for months. Do you know how it feels to be compared to another woman? You said she was younger and more beautiful than me. You even advised me to find someone else. I will never forget those words. My husband hung his head, tears silently falling. I thought I would never recover from that. Until I found comfort from someone else. I continued. Brian, my husband whispered. Yes, Brian, I nodded. I don't intend to go into details, but it's true that we had a relationship, more than just friends. I felt my face burning with shame and pain as I had to confess this. I'm not proud of it, but it was during my most vulnerable days, and Brian was there for me. My husband sobbed. I know. I have no right to blame you. It was me who pushed you away. But, do you love him? I was silent for a long time before that difficult question. Finally, I answered softly, yes. I love Brian. But, deep down in my heart, your image is still there. I wished so much that it was you who was there for me during those painful times, not Brian. I wished you hadn't left me. My husband took my hand, his eyes pleading. I'm here. I'm here now. I won't go anywhere. Give me another chance. I regret it so much. She's nothing compared to you. I was so stupid and blind. Please forgive me. I sobbed. I'm scared. I don't know if I have the strength to trust you again. I'm afraid of being hurt again. I know, he choked. And I'm willing to do anything to regain your trust. You don't have to answer me now. I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes. We sat there for a long time, crying together. Seeing the man I had loved deeply kneeling and begging, perhaps any woman in my situation would be moved. Finally, I placed my hand on my husband's cheek, nodding slightly. Shall we try again? He couldn't believe his ears. Are you serious? I smiled through my tears. Yes. But you have to give me time. We'll take it slowly. I can't promise anything yet. I'm just saying I'm willing to try again. My husband hugged me tightly, sobbing, Thank you. Thank you. My heart felt somewhat relieved because at least I had made a decision, although I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. I think many people reading this probably guess that the story will have a happy ending, that my husband and I will reunite happily, or that I'll realize my true love is with Brian. But life is not like the movies, and mistakes often have consequences. After that day, I talked frankly with Brian. Although it was painful, Brian understood and accepted my decision. He decided to transfer to another state, saying that perhaps distance would help both of us to calm down and also help me focus on reconciling with my husband. The day I saw Brian off at the airport, I cried a lot. I hugged him like I was hugging a close friend for the last time. Brian said he would always wish the best for me. Then he walked through security, disappearing from sight. I knew it would be a long time, or maybe never, before I saw him again. Losing Brian felt like losing a part of my heart, but that was the price I chose to save my marriage. As for my husband, he really changed. He apologized to both families and friends for his mistakes. He proactively quit his old job to avoid seeing her again, switching to a new job even though the salary was lower. He went to a therapist and also a marriage counselor, inviting me to join him. At first I didn't want to, but later I tried. He seemed to become a different person, always worried, caring for me, even meditating with me every morning to improve both of our mental well-being. As time went by, the wound in my heart also gradually healed. I started giving him a chance to be close to me again. We dated again like we were newly in love, slowly rekindling our feelings. Almost a year after that fateful night, everything seemed so good. We planned to renew our vows for our upcoming 6th wedding anniversary. I thought the storm had passed, and from now on we could enjoy peaceful days together. But life played another cruel trick on me. A few weeks before the anniversary, my husband started acting strangely again. He often seemed tired, sometimes irritable for no reason. I worriedly asked him about it, and he said it was due to the pressure of the new job. He wasn't used to it yet. I encouraged him to keep trying. I noticed he was checking his phone surreptitiously, but every time he saw me, he quickly turned it off. My intuition felt uneasy again, but I brushed it off, telling myself that he was probably preparing a surprise for the anniversary, which was why he was being so secretive. Then one evening, while my husband was taking a shower, his phone received a text message. I accidentally saw the screen light up with the words, "I miss you. When can we meet?" along with the sender's name, a strange female name. My hand trembled as I picked up the phone. My heart pounded. I had a feeling I was reliving the previous nightmare. I unlocked the phone. My husband hadn't hidden his phone password from me since the previous incident. A series of messages appeared, and what I read made my world spin. The messages revealed that my husband was secretly seeing that girl again. Yes, the very same girl he had betrayed me for before. It turned out that after a period of repentance and apologizing to me, he had gone back to his old ways and secretly contacted her again. The words they sent to each other were sickening. "I miss you too. Just a few more weeks, I'll arrange it. I can't wait to hold you." I almost dropped the phone. My whole body trembled. Anger, pain, and humiliation churned within me. He betrayed me again? After everything we tried to rebuild? Why? Why was fate so cruel to me? I almost went crazy. I wanted to storm into the bathroom, drag him out, and scream in his face. But some corner of my mind told me to stay calm. I needed clearer evidence. I took screenshots of the messages, then put the phone back where it was. I lay awake all night next to my husband, tears soaking my pillow. He was probably too tired and slept soundly, unaware of anything. I lay there, staring at the ceiling in pain. Brian's image suddenly came back to me. If I had chosen him that day, perhaps I wouldn't have to endure this pain again. The next morning, I called in sick to work. My husband worriedly gave me some instructions before leaving for work. As soon as he left, I immediately followed him in my car. I remembered he had a meeting at his company this morning. I waited for him to enter the building before turning the car around and driving straight to the girl's address. I had seen this address in my husband's previous apology email. When he said he had cut off contact, he showed me messages as proof. How ridiculous. Arriving there, I saw a strange car parked in front of her house. I recognized it as the car of one of my husband's former colleagues. They often went out drinking together. I had met him before. He must have borrowed his friend's car to come discreetly, afraid I would find out. I don't know where I found the courage, but I walked up and rang her doorbell. A moment later, the door opened. She appeared, wearing skimpy pajamas, looking surprised to see me. Before she could say anything, I slapped her hard across the face. "You homewrecker!" I yelled, all my fury erupting. She held her cheek, stunned, then immediately lunged at me, scratching and clawing. The two of us grappled frantically. I was like a madwoman, just venting my anger on her. Thinking back now, I find that action foolish, because the one who betrayed me was clearly my husband, but at that moment, jealousy clouded my reason. Neighbors, hearing the commotion, started running over to see what was happening. Some people intervened, pulling us apart. She cursed me, and I didn't hold back, hurling venomous words back at her. A loud confrontation unfolded right in front of her house. I screamed everything, that she was a homewrecker, that my husband had come back begging me and was still secretly seeing her, etc. She sneered. "Do you think he really loves you? He's with you out of obligation. The one he's crazy about is me. He was even here with me last night." Those words were like the final dagger to my heart. My vision went dark. The people around started whispering. I felt incredibly humiliated. Without bothering to argue further, I rushed back to my car and drove away in tears. On the way home, my mind was blank. I almost crashed into the median several times because I couldn't see clearly through my tears. Back home, I cried like a madwoman. Everything around me seemed to completely collapse. That afternoon, my husband came home. The girl must have called him and told him about my house visit. He rushed into the house, seeing me sitting on the floor amidst the mess. I had broken a few glasses, torn up our wedding photos. He turned pale, running to me. "I'm sorry. It's not what you think." I laughed hysterically. "Not what I think?" "She said you were at her house last night. The messages I read. What else do you have to deny?" My husband collapsed. I was wrong. I was foolish. Please, one more time." "One more time? How many more times? Do you consider me a toy to pick up and discard when you're bored?" I yelled, then threw the phone, containing the message evidence, at him. "We're done. This time, it's really over." He hugged my legs, crying again. "No, don't. Please. I know I'm sick. I'm addicted to the thrill of the chase. I deserve to die. But I love you. I really do. It's just that don't touch me." I pushed him away, screaming, "You bastard! You liar!" He knelt, crawled after me, tears and snot streaming down his face. "Please, please." Exhausted, I collapsed onto the chair, laughing bitterly. "You know, my biggest mistake wasn't that you betrayed me, but that I gave you a second chance. I should have divorced you the first time. I should have chosen Brian. At least he never hurt me." Hearing Brian's name, my husband cringed with shame or jealousy. I didn't care. I stood up, rushed into the bedroom, pulled out my suitcase, and started throwing my clothes into it. My husband trailed behind me. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving. I won't stay in this house another minute." He panicked. "Leaving? Where to? This is our house. Calm down." "Our? No, there's no us anymore. You keep this house and stay with your vixen." "I'm done." I dragged the suitcase out of the room. He blocked the door. "Don't. Let me go. I'll leave. You stay. The house is yours. I don't need it. Staying here only hurts me more. Get out of my way." I pushed him aside and pulled the suitcase out the door. He didn't dare to hold me back anymore, just screamed, "Please, don't leave me." But this time, I didn't turn back. My heart was numb. I threw the suitcase into the car and drove off into the night. Now, as I write these lines, I'm staying at a close friend's house in the next city. I filed for divorce, sent it to my husband via email. He's called hundreds of times, sent thousands of messages, but I haven't replied. Both families know what happened. His mother and my mother both called me, crying and begging me to reconsider, but this time, no. I will never forgive him again. Perhaps many people will wonder why I was foolish enough to trust him a second time. I ask myself the same question. Perhaps it was because of blind love, because of weakness and fear of change, because of the old memories that bound me. But now I've learned a painful lesson. Someone who betrays once is likely to betray again and again. As for Brian, I heard from a mutual friend that he's settling into his new life in a new place. I don't dare contact him, partly out of shame, partly because I don't want to further disrupt his life. I have no face left. I can only wish him happiness and torment myself. If only I had chosen him that day, if only. My story ends here, a sad ending, just like real life out there. I'm learning to move on, despite having lost so much. Trusting someone else again seems too far-fetched right now. I'm writing all this not to seek pity. I just want to share it as a cautionary tale. Sometimes going back to an ex isn't a fairy tale happy ending. And also to remind myself that I deserve to be loved by someone who truly values me, not someone who treats love like a game. Thank you for listening to this long story. I truly appreciate every piece of advice, every word of comfort. I used to believe in fairy tales, but real life isn't like that.